though he didn't design or build them, he would have. For they are the types of structures that would have appealed to his creative genius, his pride. Monuments to our own greatness, he would have called them. Stark, powerful fingers pointing to the stars. His name was Howard Rourke, a young, brilliant architect whose love of his craft was as strong and unyielding as the steel and granite of the buildings he never designed and never built. For Howard Rourke, you see, never lived, except in the pages of this book. With its publication in 1943, The Fountainhead told the story of Howard Rourke. There are some who would say this novel was based upon the early life of a real architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. Perhaps, perhaps not. Yet there are few who would deny that this book, this novel, and its story would be a guidepost and inspiration point for the thousands of Howard Rourkes who would, in time, create these magnificent structures, who would feel, as Howard Rourke felt, that every building is like a person, single and unrepeatable. Yet we are all builders, in a sense. Perhaps not in the same way as an architect, but still, we are builders. We create and build our families, the schools for our children, and the neighborhoods in which we live. Only a few of us build these things by laying brick, paving streets, or setting stone against stone. Yet we are still builders, and we build in many ways. For instance, you are about to become involved in a very unique building process called the decennial census of 1990. The contract for this building, actually a series of buildings that would almost be like a city, was drawn up back in 1790. And if you look closely, you will perhaps recognize the faces of some of those original contractors. They were not all that specific, these contractors. They never said how this construction was to take place, only that it would. For they had no way of knowing how this nation's population would grow and expand into new territory from the Atlantic to the Pacific. How this new territory, or geography, would later be divided into states, counties, cities, and all the other geographic areas that are the building blocks of a census. And so, for the past 200 years, you and your predecessors have gone about the process of building a new census every 10 years. And now, that time is upon us once again. Before we begin the story of this new building and the role you will play in its construction, let's pause for a moment and return to these monuments to ourselves. Perhaps it is a bit difficult at first to think of these structures as being similar to the one you are about to create. But then again, maybe not. Especially when you stop to consider that each of these towers of glass, steel, and stone was erected not by a single individual, but are the work of stonemasons, carpenters, plumbers, and electricians. It took backhoe operators to dig the foundation, a crane operator to lift the girders of steel, and dozens of welders and riveters to set them in place. Hundreds of hands, brawn and brain, working together to achieve a common, magnificent objective. And while it wasn't necessary for the carpenter to understand and know the work of the welder, it was necessary for each of them to have an understanding and appreciation of the other's skills and tasks, and to also know there was always a foreman nearby to answer questions, to guide, and to help. So as you begin construction on the 1990 census, keep in mind that like these craftsmen, it won't be necessary for you to know all or even most of the details of the actual construction work. It will, however, be to your benefit and that of everyone else involved in this project if you understand and appreciate how and why geography is used in the construction of the census. For the final success of this project, providing basic statistics about the people of our nation and the places where they live depends not only upon the Census Bureau collecting data about all of the people through enumeration, but also allocating that data to the correct geographic areas. For it is just as important to count people in the right place as it is to count them at all. Because if we don't count them in the right place, well, they wouldn't be fairly represented here in the Congress or in the state and local legislatures. Without this correct information, much research for American industry would be invalid, as would the research of a multitude of other organizations and groups of people who need and expect correct data from all of us who work for the Census Bureau. For just as these buildings are made up of many component pieces, so too is the structure called the census. It will include the entire set of geographic areas the Census Bureau uses for collecting, tabulating, and publishing census data. This includes the political, administrative, and statistical units used for tabulating and reporting the data, along with the collection units designed for taking the census. And since you are involved in the collection process, the units that make up our collection geography will be our primary focus. This then will be our story, your building, and both begin here in the Washington, D.C. suburbs at Census Bureau headquarters. It is here in the Geography Division that we find the master architects for this, the Census Bureau's geographic framework. The people who, by using a wide variety of technical skills, knowledge, and sophisticated computers, have provided the design specifications for the actual construction of the 1990 census geography. This framework is all part of the TIGER system, the topologically integrated geographic encoding and referencing system, a totally automated single-source database that will provide all the geographic products and services for the 1990 census. Virtually all the information about census geography required to conduct field operations and to tabulate data will be contained within this TIGER file. The map base, for instance, will contain not only the census boundaries, but will also show all known road, water, railroad, and other ground features needed to help us take the census. If the Geography Division is thought of as the master architect for census geography, then we can think of the Field Division's Regional Census Centers, or RCCs, as the contractor's office for this construction project. For the RCCs are responsible for overseeing the field data collection activities of over 450 district offices that will be established for this census. And it is out of these district offices that the enumerators, or census takers, will actually work. These RCCs also provide geographic, technical, administrative, outreach, recruiting, automation, and public information support to the district offices. Within these same regional centers, you will find a census geography staff, a map staff, and the Geographic Update System staff, or GUS, as it is most often called. The role of the Geographic Support Staff is much like that of a foreman on a construction project. For just as the construction foreman must be certain that everyone is working from and with the proper blueprints, the people in the Geographic Support Staff must be sure that everyone is working with proper and correct census maps. Like any building, the first and most important step in the construction process begins with the foundation, as it must be true and strong. The foundation of our building, then, is made up of something called census blocks, and they are the smallest and most numerous of the components that will go into our building. For the 1990 census, between 8 and 10 million blocks will be the foundation for all field data collection, and later for tabulation purposes. As you might suspect, census blocks, at least within urban areas, are just that, a rectangular piece of land containing houses or apartment buildings. However, when we move out into the countryside, a census block may contain many square miles bounded by a county line, or by visible physical features such as roads, streams, or maybe a railroad track. We use these features as the block boundaries so that the enumerator can easily find the extent of each block during data collection. Each block is identified on the census map by a 3-digit number that uniquely identifies that piece of geography when used in combination with other codes. Moving from these blocks to this map, you can see the next level of census collection geography. Here we can see that our census blocks have been grouped into something called an address register area, or simply an ARA. Outside of large urban areas, these ARAs are usually equivalent to a block group, which, as the name implies, is a group of census blocks. And each of these are coded, or begin with, the same leading number. On this ARA map, all of the blocks begin with the number 2. Block groups are geographic units that are used for data tabulations after data collection is completed. ARA maps are basic working tools for the entire census-taking process. They will guide enumerators and office clerks during many census operations. Enumerators will update the maps as part of their job during canvassing operations to reflect changes in street patterns. In many areas, enumerators will also use the maps to mark the location of each housing unit with a map spot and number. Now, because it will be necessary at some point in the not-too-distant future to tabulate the data, to make use of all this information we will be collecting, a numbering system of ARAs has been established to identify what collection method is used for each ARA. This is something you will be hearing more about and in greater detail at another time. For now, though, let's just say that when you hear terms like pre-list, pre-canvass, and list enumerate, they will all be reflected by the unique range of numbers used to identify each set of ARAs and the maps showing these ARAs. As you might suspect, ARA maps will at times differ greatly in their appearance, depending on the area they cover. Here, for example, is one for a densely populated inner city, and it consists of only a few census blocks. On the other hand, this ARA is for a rural part of the country and covers much land area and contains many census blocks. But be they urban or rural, all ARAs go together to form the counties of each and every state. Here, on this county locator map, you can see the boundaries and the number for each ARA within the county. This, then, is collection geography. And like the pieces of a puzzle or the blocks of a building, they interlock and go together, each dependent upon and supporting the other, starting with our census blocks, our foundation to build upwards. But this is not the end of our story, our building. For now, the time has come to link together the way in which our building was constructed to the way in which it will be used. And this we will call tabulation geography. In other words, it's time to talk about the needs of our tenants for this building and how to meet those needs. And those needs will be met by our ability, your ability to make this structure, this census, a thing of which you will be proud, and a thing which will please its occupants, the people who will use the data we have collected. To demonstrate how tabulation geography works, let's take a look inside the shell of this building at what we could think of as a typical floor plan, or actually a segment of a floor plan. Once inside, what you will see is a part of the floor plan that is known as Cannon County. What you won't see, however, because this building is just too big and our time too short, is the fact that this floor plan, or any of our floor plans for that matter, can, and in many instances will, be broken up into many sections or components, depending on the needs of our tenants. By and large, though, we will reconstruct or tabulate each floor plan according to two major categories. They are called political and statistical tabulation areas. And the best way to get a handle on how we will be doing this is... Careful, there's still a lot of work going on in here. Look down here, and you can see the segment of the floor plan for Cannon County and how it is made up of many of the components we call tabulation geography. Here, for instance, is the city of Macon, an incorporated place of nearly 100,000 people. Just north is Oxbury Junction, an unincorporated community. Now, let's take a closer look at this area and some of the changes that have recently taken place and how these changes will affect our tabulation geography. The ways we will have to modify this particular floor plan to meet the needs of the people who live here. Since 1980, the last time we took a decennial census, Macon has expanded its corporate limits to include much of the Oxbury Junction community. And while this will have some bearing on the way we will tabulate data for this area, it doesn't tell the whole story about what else has taken place here and how these changes will necessitate our doing something called a block split operation. For in addition to absorbing much of Oxbury Junction within its political boundaries, the city of Macon has also begun to provide such services as fire, police, and garbage collection for these new residents of the city. Children in the recently annexed areas of Oxbury no longer go to the schools of Cannon County, but rather to those of Macon. And all this means, at least for our purposes and that of tabulating our findings, that we will perform that operation called a block split. Look even closer at this floor plan, this map, and you will see that this census block, which we originally called 101 in our collection geography, is split by the political boundary or corporate limits between the city of Macon and the unincorporated portion of Cannon County. However, that line, be it invisible or following a visible feature, won't help the people around here in terms of relating data to the correct community, school district, or election precinct in which they live and vote. So what we must do is create two blocks out of this one, and we will label these blocks 101A and 101B. Now, all of the people and housing counted in Block 101 during the census must be assigned to either 101A or 101B. This then will allow us to tabulate the correct statistics for both the city of Macon and Cannon County. And that, in its simplest form, is why we perform an operation, a block split operation. In time, you will be hearing a lot more about block splits, MCDs, BGs, ARAs, CTs, and more acronyms than you can probably ever imagine. And all of them will have to do with the business of this construction project called the Decennial Census of 1990. So what does it look like? Your building? You know the answer. You've known it all along.